How did Joseph Smith produce the Book of Mormon, the foundational scripture for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints? Now, stories and narratives of the translation process of the Book of Mormon are at the core of LDS truth claims. They're also contested because they're related to a folklore practice of magic and seer stones, and an evolving definition of translation that often make modern Latter-day Saints squirm a bit. It's frequently said that Latter-day Saints don't have a theology, they have a history, and so this history takes on added weight. And a new topics and questions page produced by the LDS Church on the translation of the Book of Mormon is just the latest example of the church wrestling with how to explain this history in a way that's both responsive to the latest scholarship, as well as faith-affirming to their millions of believers. In this video, I'd like to dissect how this new Q&A page is both the product of recent work done by academics, including those at the LDS Church History Library, as well as in response to contemporary anxieties on how we narrate these sacred stories. Let's dig in. In case you've missed it, this is my third video this week on these new topics and question pages that the church released just last week. On Monday, I did a video on their new page on plural marriage. On Wednesday, I did one on Joseph Smith's character. And today, I'm digging into the Book of Mormon translation. If you enjoy this type of analysis on history, religious history, and Mormon history, make sure you are subscribed to this channel. I will return back to my normal schedule next week with deep dives on Monday, contemporary connections to history on Wednesday, and historiographical peeks behind the curtain on Fridays. And just as a tease, this coming Monday, I'm going to be starting a multi-week series on Mormonism and politics, beginning with Joseph Smith's own relationship to electoral and party politics, especially in Nauvoo. All right, let's get back to the Book of Mormon translation history. I'm going to take a different approach in this video than I did my previous two videos on these topics and question pages, in that I'm going to start this video with the general history of the topic, and then we will dig into the material found on this topic and question page. And I want to start with an anecdote. In late 1831, Joseph Smith, who's only presided over this new Mormon tradition for about 18 months, gathers for a church conference. And at this conference, several ask him, "Joseph, will you please explain how you translated the Book of Mormon?" And that question came with purpose, because in the weeks immediately preceding that meeting, Ezra Booth, who had been an early LDS convert who left the church and was now publishing several critical letters offering an anti-Mormon perspective on Mormonism's foundings. And one of those letters detailed how Joseph Smith used a seer stone that Smith had previously used in his treasure-seeking activities to translate the Book of Mormon, something that struck the general populace as evidence that Mormonism must be a scam, it must be a fraud, because how can you use the same seer stone for treasure-seeking as with the translation of the Book of Mormon? So they wanted Joseph Smith to clarify, how did you translate the Book of Mormon? But instead of giving details, Joseph Smith told them it is not meant for the information of the translation of the Book of Mormon to go before the world. It is only necessary for the world to know that it was translated through the gift and power of God. And that phrase ends up being shorthand in the Mormon tradition for centuries after that, the 2 centuries following, that it would be a way to describe the Book of Mormon's translation, its coming forth, that emphasizes its miraculous nature while eluding specific information, especially its connection to the seer stones. Because Joseph Smith did use the seer stones to translate the Book of Mormon. He was born in this folkloric magic culture that used these seer stones to find hidden objects, lost treasure. That's how Joseph Smith made money in many instances, and in many instances didn't make money because he was not always successful. But as Joseph Smith tried to become seen as a much more genteel religious leader, that they wanted to gain respect for the Mormon tradition, he tried to distance himself and his movement from those magic origins. So instead, that's the language they use, the gift and power of God. And eventually, William Phelps, an early Mormon convert who comes from a more literary and biblical background, is the first to use the term Urim and Thummim, a phrase that's from the Bible itself, to refer to sacred objects used for translation. And so then they start referring to the items used for the translation of the Book of Mormon as a Urim and Thummim, giving it a bit of biblical heft. And for decades after this, you would have critics emphasizing the magic origins of the Book of Mormon, connecting the gold plates with the seer stones, and the church instead emphasizing the miraculous nature and instead highlighting the interpreters, these interpretive devices that were allegedly found with the gold plates in the hill Cumorah, therefore distancing themselves from the magic culture. It is not until the 21st century, after decades of scholarly work, including by faithful LDS Church historians, emphasizing the seer stone's connection to the Book of Mormon, that the church acknowledged that connection. Now you can go to the LDS Church History Museum in Salt Lake City and see a large picture of Joseph Smith's seer stone that he used to translate the Book of Mormon. You can read the Joseph Smith Papers Project that also have high quality resolution images of the seer stone. So while for decades the church was not always unanimous and consistent in denouncing the seer stone, but they were quite frequent in emphasizing the interpreters, now they have come to accept the seer stone narrative. But not everyone within the Latter-day Saint tradition has been happy with the shift. As we see with polygamy, that now the LDS Church acknowledges Joseph Smith's practice and teaching and theology of polygamy, you see a growing number of this populist resistance movement in the LDS Church that deny that historical element, saying it's a church giving up its sacred values and morals and denouncing now Joseph Smith as what they call a devalued or an unsaintly characteristic. You see a similar dynamic with the Joseph Smith translation. A large group of Latter-day Saints, often but not always synonymous with what's called the Heartlander movement, claim the church is giving up its divine origins, its sacred stories, especially related to the Book of Mormon. The Heartlander phrase is a reference to these people's belief that the Book of Mormon took place in what's now the United States. What had been a common interpretation by some early Latter-day Saints, though now Latter-day Saints view the geography of the Book of Mormon to take place more in the Central America or South America. And these Heartlanders critique those, especially those they denounce as secular scholars, for moving the church away from those divine origins stories. And they've recently latched onto the seer stone myth, saying that the church embracing these secular scholars and talking about their seer stone are moving the church away from the divine truth, which is that Joseph Smith did not use seer stones. He was not connected to magic culture. He only used the interpreters. So this Gospel Topics Q&A page is both a response to recent scholarship, but also, I'd argue, a response to this Heartlander critique of this seer stone scholarship. So let's talk about how it tries to maintain that balance. You can see a lot of the tensions that I've already outlined in the very first paragraph of the overview section of this page. For instance, it emphasizes the miraculous events of the Book of Mormon, trying to keep it on a general parameter. It talks about the broad definition of translation as divine revelation, trying not to get into the particulars. And it highlights the breathtaking pace of translation, a traditional apologetic approach to emphasize that Joseph Smith couldn't have written it because he translated it in only about 60 working days. I don't have enough time in this video to get into that broader historical narrative and where those days come from. Also note in the ensuing two paragraphs further elements of the traditional apologetic approach to the Book of Mormon, now reflective of some of the more recent faithful scholarship. It emphasizes that Joseph Smith did not share many details. It says we don't have a complete understanding. It summarizes by the gift and power of God. Again, the phrase that they're taking from Joseph Smith when he tried to avoid giving details. This is a history lesson that both reflects this long tradition of trying to avoid particulars while trying to integrate some of the scholarly interpretations from the Joseph Smith Papers project. Things like talking about reminiscences and how we can use source criticism, This section also, or the page then goes on to answer the question, what did Joseph Smith mean when he said he translated the Book of Mormon? By saying that Joseph Smith didn't share details about the translation process. This is actually a way for the church to sidestep another major debate within Latter-day Saint communities of when Joseph Smith used the interpreters, or more commonly the seer stone, what did he see? Did he see words? Did he get impressions? Was he given ideas that he then put into his own words? The phrases that scholars usually use within the LDS tradition is it a tight translation where Joseph Smith was given the exact words, or he saw the words on the stone? Or is it a loose translation where he was given the ideas that he then put in his own words? The LDS Church, following the Joseph Smith example, tries to evade giving particulars, instead emphasizing, like Joseph Smith did in 1831, it's by the gift and power of God, and we should leave it at that. But the one area where this page does come down strongly is that Joseph Smith did use the seer stones for at least some of the translation of the Book of Mormon. It says that Joseph Smith might have used the interpreters, the material found with the gold plates in Hill Cumorah, at least for a portion of the Book of Mormon. But then it moves on to this paragraph where it emphasizes that the use of seer stones was common among Christians, which we could get into and talk about maybe for a future video drink if you're doing the drinking game. I'll talk about how common it was and what it meant in the politics. But in general, this has become the basic LDS apologia for explaining the seer stones, now that they admit the seer stones were in existence and that they were used for the translation. The way to explain it is, well, it was common for early American Christians, which to a large degree was true. Most scholars now emphasize it. It also, in this paragraph, uses what I call the education model for seer stones that has become increasingly common, that Joseph Smith's use of seer stones was a teaching experience, a learning chance, a way for him to learn how to see things and to see God speak through first things and then eventually individuals on his path to prophethood. Now, I actually have some reservations about that model. I take a different approach in my book, American Zion, when I talk about Joseph Smith's relationship to magic culture and the coming forth of the Book of Mormon. Maybe I'll talk about that in another time. This Q&A page also goes into reflecting the scholarly interpretations in recent years about how the Urim and Thummim, a phrase that's used to explain both, explain that the Urim and Thummim was used to refer both to the interpreters found with the gold plates, as well as to Joseph Smith's seer stones. This is clearly drawing on recent scholarship, whereas for a long time, Latter-day Saints only referred to the interpreters as the Urim and Thummim, but now they are acknowledging, which is based on the historical records, that that phrase was broad enough to refer to the seer stones. Now, it doesn't say that they use that phrase to grant some biblical history or biblical credence to the translation project in order to distance it from the magic culture, but you can only expect so much in this type of, that's more of an academic article rather than this hagiographic devotional type of work, which is what these pages are meant to do. It also addresses the question of why has the LDS Church, through its artwork, often only used the interpreters, the material found with the gold plates rather than the seer stone, and explains that the 20th century church relied on sources that focused mainly on the interpreters buried with the plates. That's careful of saying that for a long time, the LDS Church dismissed the sources that talked about the seer stones. So, it doesn't fully admit that the church was wrong in emphasizing those things. It tries to elide that fact by saying that they just relied on the sources that focused on the interpreters, but it at least acknowledges that that previous artwork was a product of its time, which hopefully means the church will be getting new artwork going forward. If the section on translation tools is a direct response to the Heartlanders who are trying to deny that seer stones were used, the following section on Book of Mormon witnesses, in many ways a response to ex-Mormon or anti-Mormon critics, depending on how you want to phrase them, who are trying to claim that the Book of Mormon witness statements are much more spiritual and not tangible, and therefore not as reliable. Now, the witness statements for the Book of Mormon have always been important to Book of Mormon narratives. They were published at the very front of the first edition of the Book of Mormon. They were meant to provide evidence that it wasn't just Joseph Smith that saw the plates. Look at all these other people who saw the plates, mostly coming from one family. In fact, one of my favorite quotes from Mark Twain, when he wrote about Joseph Smith and the coming forth of the Book of Mormon, he said, "I'm not going to believe there were gold plates no matter how many Whitmers you'd tell me who come to tell me otherwise." That's a great Mark Twain quip. But this section is responding to historical accounts coming from people like Martin Harris, who say that when they saw the gold plates, they saw it with a spiritual eye. Now, this page and LDS apologists take a couple of approaches when trying to respond that you can see in this section. One, they emphasize that Martin Harris was using scriptural language. That's a spiritual eye is a phrase that comes from the Bible, and therefore he's using scriptural language in order to explain his miraculous experience. They also explain that there are other occasions where Martin Harris or David Whitmer used language that did emphasize the physicality of what they're doing, like David Whitmer, who said that not only were they in the spirit when they saw the place, but they were also in the body. Now, I know these debates mean a lot to both believers and critics, but as an academic who studies religious experiences and people who claim religious experiences throughout American history, I'll just say that I think both sides of this debate are expecting way more out of this language and narrative than is what actually allowed. These people we're studying existed in a world where the spiritual and the physical did not operate separately. They were conjoined. So yeah, I understand that if you were a believer or a critic, you want to be able to tear into these sources and determine, what did David Whitmer mean when he was saying he saw it with a spiritual eye? Did he mean that he was seeing it while influenced by the spirit, or was he in a dream or whatnot? I don't think you can have any firm conclusions on any of that, which is why scholars often don't try to intervene in these types of debates, even if this section of the Topics and Questions page does reflect this long-standing anxiety of trying to use the witness statements as quasi-enlightenment evidence for the reality of the plates. One final notable thing from this Topics and Question page on the translation of the Book of Mormon is it talks about revisions of the Book of Mormon and actually walks through how Joseph Smith assisted with the new editions of the Book of Mormon published in 1837 and then in 1842, and his involvement with both small and larger revisions. Now, a majority of the thousands of revisions you might hear that took place in the Book of Mormon, most of them are stylistic and are very explainable. I do think it's interesting that they published a list with this page of substantive changes from the Book of Mormon that did bring some major changes. Now, these are only challenges for those within the Latter-day Saint community who believe in a tight translation model, meaning that Joseph Smith was given the exact words while translating, and so how dare he change it? In fact, there are some people like David Whitmer who never forgave Joseph Smith for ever changing the Book of Mormon and his revelations. That was a sign of corruption. And of course, there are some critics who say that if the Book of Mormon was supposed to be the most perfect book or the most correct book is the phrasing, then how could Joseph Smith revise? But I think reflecting the broader scholarship of Joseph Smith and the coming forth of the Book of Mormon, viewing this translation as an ongoing process in reaction to evolving in the climate, I don't think these Book of Mormon revisions are as heavy a topic as they might have been in the past. So there you have it. That's my overview of the new Topics and Questions page on the Book of Mormon translation. In general, I think it does as much as one could hope for this page to do, in both incorporating recent scholarship from LDS scholars, especially the Joseph Smith Papers Project, as well as trying to maintain a level of faith and miraculous nature, a tradition that originated all the way to Joseph Smith. I mean, that tension has been around since 1831 of trying to reaffirm the miraculous origins of the Book of Mormon without going into as many particulars that in a faithful narrative would distract from the miraculous origins, or in a critical narrative would highlight the human origins of the Book of Mormon. That is a complicated balance. And further, I think this page demonstrates the church trying to balance, on the one hand, pressure to be more upfront and transparent with the historical process, admitting that seer stones played a role, that magic culture provided the context for the coming forth of the Book of Mormon, and also responding to people like the Heartlanders who are denouncing the church for giving up its sacred narratives and selling out to secular history. That's a fascinating balance that I think we can see in place here. If you found this video useful, please make sure to hit the like button and share it with others. If I missed something, please leave it in the comments and subscribe to this channel if you have not already. I'm excited to get back to a normal schedule next week, talking about deep dives on Monday, contemporary topics on Wednesday, and historiographical backgrounds on Fridays. History has never been more relevant than it is today, which is why these conversations, I believe, are so important.